All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Matt Hatch from EY, and we're going to get kicked off here today with today's session. I'll do a quick introduction for myself, and then I'd love to have Steve and Silvio both introduce themselves, and then we're going to have about a 45-minute discussion on Algorand and the impact they are making. We'll save some time for Q&A towards the end, so please do have use the chat window and log any questions you've got there, and our team will be looking through those, and we'll interject those into the conversation a little bit later. So as I mentioned, Matt Hatch, EY, I'm a partner based here in dark San Francisco right now at 6 a.m. Happy to be up here early this morning with this with my esteemed friends here from Algorand. I lead FinTech at EY across the Americas region. We work with many high growth companies across the entire landscape, crypto, payments, lending, robo, insurtech, et cetera. And it's been a pleasure to work with many successful entrepreneurs over the year, including Steve and Silvio here on the call today. So excited to learn a little bit more about each of you. Why don't we start with just personal introductions, and then we're going to spend the majority of the time talking a bit more about Algorand, of course. So Silvio, do you want to get us kicked off?
All right. Good morning, Matt. Good morning, all audience. And so I'm Silvio Micali. I'm the founder of Algorand and an MIT professor, cryptographer for a long time, and then finally could not resist the charm and appeal of the blockchain. And I decided to join forces with Steve here and launch Algorand to make a difference in the space.
Terrific. Steve?
So, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I got my start in the mid 90s and kind of early days of the internet when I was a pretty young guy. And, as I started to, spend more time just trying to understand what was going on in kind of the blockchain and crypto space, found it was, one of the first things I had really seen in the 20 years in between that had kind of a similar level of dynamism to kind of those early days of the internet. And was fortunate to get introduced to Silvio by Pillar, Boston-based VC, and Union Square Ventures, and kind of join the project. So it's been a really interesting few years, and I think it's exciting the way the space is starting to evolve.
That's great. So let's dive into Algorand a little bit, and just for our audience to give them some context here, we're going to talk a bit first about just what Algorand is up to, products and general company information there, and then dive into a little bit, very brief, on regulatory. You can't touch on cryptocurrency and distributed ledger, blockchain technologies without touching on that. And then a little bit of a technical overview as well in terms of how the product is working. And then we'll wrap up with some questions, as I mentioned, from the audience. So as we start, we just think about Algorand. What, Silvio, maybe with you, why did you start Algorand? What was the purpose? What inspired you to start the company?
Well, let me tell you, when I started, right, I heard the famous blockchain trilemma, right, that claimed that no blockchain could be simultaneously secure, decentralized, and scalable. And I said, wow, then what can a blockchain do? Because so who wants an insecure blockchain? Nobody. And who wants a blockchain that doesn't scale? Maybe if you want to go through the effort to set up a blockchain for friends and family, you don't. But otherwise, the world is a larger place, has to scale. And if you're not interested in decentralization, why you need a blockchain? So, and by the way, as a scientist, as a cryptographer, nothing gets me more excited when somebody tells you the following thing is impossible. Because really? Because there are two truths in life. One is that there are in life a few impossible things. And actually, we welcome them because they give depth to our lives and meaningfulness. But, the truth also is that much fewer than the things we think impossible are actually impossible. So I decided to say, let's see what we can do differently. And let's see if this trilemma is really true. And turns out it wasn't true. And so that was I thought that the world needed a blockchain which was secure, scalable, and decentralized at the same time. And that's why we pulled a great team and went after this challenge.
That's great. Proving it's not impossible is certainly a great inspiration. And certainly you guys have done that. So we were chatting, Steve, just yesterday around the key areas of the product focus: DeFi, tokenization, NFTs. and some of the work you guys are doing with specific jurisdictions. You want to just give a bit of an overview around the various capabilities you guys have been working on for the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, I guess first, I would say, really, as these public networks tend to be, Algorand is an ecosystem where there are really hundreds of companies building on the protocol, and I think largely, what we've seen start to emerge are, some themes, and kind of a few key ones are, and actually, if I take a step back, yesterday there was a big protocol upgrade that went in for Algorand Virtual Machine. Which enabled considerably more computational power and allows for people to develop smart contracts much more simply. And we think that is something that will enable kind of even more interesting, kind of especially DeFi applications and NFT marketplaces that have been all growing already. And so I guess on that front, we sort of see people building in kind of three main areas. One are I think what you sort of say is blockchain and crypto native projects. Creating really fascinating ways of creating and monetizing kind of art, so NFTs, and I think the whole theme of digital scarcity is really interesting for sure. And then the second are decentralized financial applications, and I think the whole DeFi space really represents in many ways what we'll start to see as the plumbing of kind of a new financial ecosystem grow. And so that's very interesting. I think on the second part, one of our conclusions is that there need to be plumbing and tools for people to issue more traditional digital assets and bring those on chain. And we're excited to see that start to happen more. Platforms like Securitize or Archax or Symmetria allow for both security token issuance and for trading of those tokens in a regulated way. And we think that that's going to be increasingly important. And, kind of hand in hand with that, one of the other things that, I think Silvio brought up, the trilemma and being able to scale and maintain, a number of important technical properties. And I think that's led to a lot of interest for national blockchain projects. So a couple of weeks ago, El Salvador announced that they're using Algorand for their national initiatives. Colombia announced recently that their vaccine passport system is running on top of Algorand. Bermuda has announced previously that their medical payments will be happening on Algorand, and all of these are happening with partners that have built technology in their own protocols on top of Algorand. And so I think we're excited that there's a number of different ways that are a number of different types of applications that are driving adoption. We think, as with any kind of new technology, it's not necessarily kind of one thing that ultimately ends up working. And so, I think we've been encouraged by all the people that are building and driving users onto the network.
Yes, and Stephen, may I add something? Certainly, our ability to Algorand is the best place to issue an asset, tokenization, et cetera, but all these things, particularly with national deployment, have also another angle. So somehow from the very beginning, we never stopped operating. The network is always live. We never have an outage, not even for a minute. We produced millions and millions of blocks every 4.5 seconds. And this is necessary in a national project. Can you imagine that all of a sudden you are an healthcare application, say, sorry, the network is down? No, you need not only this sophisticated technology, but you need this incredible reliability and this finality of a block that Algorand does no forks and makes the network ideal for this large deployment by whether on a national basis or even a large institution.
So Silvio, where does the trilemma stand now? Are people still believing that there's a challenge with the scalability and securability of the network?
I tell you one thing, Matt, so you can solve something and then and a few people certainly have taken notice, but we need a lot much more education, because a lot of people think very strange things. For instance, they continue to believe, they say blockchains, somehow dirty the environment. Well, not Algorand and not a few others says the trilemma is still true. Well, it's false. We just proved it. And so there is a lot. So you need $10 to launch an NFT. No, right? In Algorand is 1,000 of an algo, which is 2 cents of a penny. So yes, there is a lot of, unfortunately, we need more education in the old system, because the old system attracts a lot of people, but we do not exactly share a common truth. And some, I'm very glad that you and your audience are asking the right questions, but very often people just repeat whatever was said before. It's convenient, it's certainly easy. It doesn't take cost to rehash things that you've already spoken a few years ago. But now the blockchains are different, totally different setting, and people still believe they suffer for the initial hicks, right? And not anymore.
Yeah. Silvio, I'm glad you mentioned the environment. We're going to come back to that a little bit later when we talk about proof of stake or pure proof of stake and some of the technical aspects of the product. But for now, as we stick to just sort of the product, and Steve, you talked about some of the national programs that you guys have. You also mentioned DeFi. And when I think about sort of the future of DeFi and some of the ecosystem contributors that are going to be out there outside of Algorand, do you see a future that is endless in terms of the use cases that any particular jurisdiction, company, or nationality could take on leveraging the technology?
I mean, I think certainly it's somewhere in endless, and I think one of the ways to think about public blockchains is a lot like the internet in some ways. 20 years ago, you have people saying, "Oh, what will I use the internet for?" And is there more than one application, or this kind of thing? And so I think the answer is, really, kind of what isn't leveraging that kind of technology now. And I think this is different in some ways because it's more centered around kind of the financial world, but I think one way to look at it is if you look broadly across, say, Latin America, there's a considerable percentage of the population there that doesn't have bank accounts. And so when we think about DeFi and we think about people starting to use digital wallets, it's definitely true that the majority of people have smartphones, but many of them have never had any way to borrow, lend, earn interest, and what DeFi sort of represents in a lot of these markets is people's first exposure to kind of proper financial tools, and I think we're seeing that as sort of very exciting, and because really I think the people really look at DeFi as a lot of different things, but one of the main things it is really its public financial infrastructure that can be leveraged by individuals, but also can be leveraged by institutions and countries as they start to think about how they can bring interesting services. And if you look at a country like El Salvador, over the first few weeks of their digital wallet being live, they've got a couple million users there, and it hasn't been problem free, but I think that it is sort of an interesting experiment that they're undergoing right now.
Yeah, I agree. There is a tremendous opportunity. I mean, when you look at the underbanked or unbanked in a lot of those jurisdictions, and they have the infrastructure in place, as you've mentioned, right? Mobile and connectivity with DeFi, with more tools, there's a great opportunity to sort of leapfrog in terms of the adoption levels that we've, EY has historically studied adoption levels globally, and there is a huge opportunity to leapfrog, much like what we saw maybe 8 years ago in China is sort of my expectation and hope, and can have such a positive impact on society if we can get more folks into banked and into the financial system.
Well, and if you just look at payments, take payments as one example, right? 4 to 5% of GDP ends up getting reduced just by friction in the system there, and in America, it's true that we have a lot of different payment options, but one of the primary use cases that happens in a lot of countries are people that have moved and want to send money back home, and those types of remittances can be incredibly expensive, like far above that if you think about kind of the Western Unions and other sort of money transmitters that have historically been players in that space. And so I think these shifts are not only a benefit to kind of individuals, but if you just look broadly from like national scale, the ability to positively impact GDP and growth, in the whole country is something that we think is a really interesting opportunity.
Yeah, we haven't touched on tokenization too much here so far. I did notice there was drone racing and NFTs being issued for that, and some of the news that you guys have been involved in there. What's your perspective on where the NFT and tokenization space goes, and Algorand's role in that?
Wow. So first of all, you talk about DeFi, you cannot talk about must talk about the tokenization, because when you look at DeFi, yes, decentralized finance, but I like to also interpret DeFi like a democratization of finance. And so certain assets are so costly that only billionaires can actually afford it. If I'm just a builder and I build an office building, to whom can I sell it? To 4 or 5 local billionaires who live in real estate, right? But if I tokenize it, so that means I'm making thousands of parts of it. Then I can afford even to anybody on the street just to put, somehow a little money to buy a little piece of a building. And that is phenomenal, because for me, the builder, now I can really get the value of whatever I build. And then as an investor, and actually an investor also of modest means, I'm thrilled to be able to participate into something that otherwise I have no access to. So, but tokenization then needs, it's not easy technically, but we made it easy, and we made it very easy to use. Essentially, you fill a module and you are done. And then is a cost of 1,000th of an algo, and you have somehow expressed how many tokens there are in the future, how many tokens you are issuing now. Who has the right to claw back things or freeze the tokens that it needed to be. The whole shebang, very, very easy. Tokenization is very exciting. And by the way, once you have these tools of tokenization, what you want to do actually is to sell them at an auction. Because like, a Dutch auction, the same way that, the treasuries of the various countries sell their bonds, right? But rather than selling them to a few suspects, in our case, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc., you can sell it to the entire population. The same thing at a building, you can sell it on a planetary scale. So I think that tokenization and auctions and a blockchain that scales is really what is going to change the world and allow even democratic nations to become even more democratic by asking their own citizens to participate in the very issue of their bonds, for instance.
Yeah. Silvio, that's great, because I think what you've just explained does a great job of characterizing what, we all have seen tokenization of art and of tickets and things of that nature, which have, relatively speaking, low impact. But I think what you're pointing to, and Steve, you hit on this earlier with the reduction of friction in so many areas of the economy, and how it can be further democratized and made accessible, and taking and putting productivity back in the economy that is otherwise being lost in terms of GDP. So I think that's a great way of thinking about it.
I think there's also just kind of another aspect here. What we're starting to see on chain are also, I think sometimes friction. So I think there's two things. One is we're definitely seeing novel uses of NFTs, and sort of like digital scarcity and economics tied to them that simply kind of couldn't exist in the traditional world. And I think there's others where the friction being reduced enables opportunities that simply couldn't practically be done before, even if they were technically possible. And so a good example of that is we've started to see real estate being fractionalized and sold on chain, and these are income generating properties. And in the past, you couldn't have hundreds or thousands of investors in a particular property because there's no way to kind of manage that paperwork. Whereas now we've seen a bunch of properties being sold in $50 increments, and ultimately being completely sold in minutes, because there's a lot of people that do want to contribute and have a stake in physical property, but just had no avenue to do it before, and didn't have kind of the money and the resources to go figure that out. So I think there's definitely interesting ways that opportunity is sort of being brought to a broader user base than has been the case in the past.
And sorry, but just one more example. I started tokenizing something unique and then make it bigger. But even when you start tokenizing single item NFTs, is very important to have the technology right. So, for instance, the CI, that is the Industrial Society for Artists and Authors, and so as a tokenized on Algorand, 4.5 million has issued 4.10 million NFTs representing the digital rights of Italian musicians to songs and pieces of music. Now, let me tell you, that is a very venerable society. It goes back to Puccini, Verdi, who wanted to to organize musicians not to be prey of others, but represent themselves. That is a wonderful example. But this example can work. Why? Because to tokenize 4.5 million NFT, which they did actually in a single day, it was done because we have scale. But it cost them $9,000 altogether. If you, in a traditional way or in a different way, let's put it this way, when NFT cost $10 or $5, it would have been, $500 million. Who can tokenize all these 4.5 million rights if to pay? Well, step one, spend $500 million. Well, it's tokenized tomorrow. But if the cost of these, it really is another world.
Yeah, the scale is absolutely incredible. What's achievable here? Why don't we switch just briefly on the regulatory agenda? I know this just gets so much attention lately, and you're talking about anything in the cryptocurrency and tokenization space, and certainly an interesting time right now in the United States to watch this. What's your views? Let's just start in the U.S. and then I think you guys also have a really interesting perspective because you've been operating with some of these other national jurisdictions. But in the U.S., what's your view on the need for regulation and the impact it could have on the industry?
Well, I think over time, we think that there won't be sort of this distinction between blockchain finance and traditional finance, and certainly there's a need to regulate the way people get on and off the systems, and fiat on ramps and off ramps and exchanges. And I think everyone largely agrees that's the case. I think one of the things that is really important is that if you look in the case of, say, the internet, the U.S. was very forward-leaning in terms of making sure that innovation could grow and that people could sort of explore new ideas. And I think whatever regulation emerges, it's important that innovation be something that America stands for. So I think it's certainly feels like it's going to be a discussion over a period of time, but I also think regulatory certainty is kind of a net benefit as well. And so I think that there's a number of different angles to look at it. And I think that's what we've seen in some other countries where, they're sort of more holistically embracing, blockchain technology and crypto is, they have defined frameworks and regulatory frameworks around it. And it's, very straightforward in terms of how projects, operate and how those assets are treated in their countries. And so I think, it'll be interesting to see how these discussions shake out, but certainly it is important, and I think protecting users is important, but fostering innovation is important too. And I think that's sort of a core part of what America is about. And I think we're starting to see, if you look at in China, I think one of the things that we see in terms of some of the restrictions they've been placing is, I think they went to great lengths and have a lot of control over the internet. I think it seems that they're taking a similar approach on public blockchain networks. And I think making sure that, the US is part of an open system is something that's going to be philosophically important as well. So, we'll see how it shakes out, but it's definitely a key topic.
So I agree. I'll tell you, it is a truism, but doesn't make it is less true that a good regulation makes a better market. And so in some sense, foster an innovation economy will not be easy, but is necessary, particularly for a country like ours who wants to continue to lead. The other thing that have to be important is that is a very new medium, and that we are looking at a very new type of platform, very new world up here. And the regulations, there are always, at any point in time, rules on the books. And it's good things that rules don't change daily, otherwise there will not be rules. But we have to be very careful about premature regulation can be very pernicious. So, because if you flatten whatever is happening now on the blockchain, on all rules invented, a long time ago only, and that's all you do, well, you are going to create a distortion. Similar way that you take, a map of the world and you want to put it on paper. Greenland looks incredibly big when actually it's not as big as it is. So it is important, actually, always, I think, to have more education about what the space is. For us technologists, academics, for firms, and certainly for regulators too, because they have a lot of responsibility. And so certain things are new. And so let me mention one, which is I think it's going to be important, but I'm sure that maybe miss at the first pass, which is technical decentralization, which essentially means that, say, you want to be decentralized. What does it mean? That you can welcome the consensus protocol, say, okay, sure. If a blockchain is something, yes, you can certainly buy a few supercomputers and join, mining, and you'll participate too. I don't have the money to buy a few supercomputers. Okay. Or if you have a delegated proof of stake where you say, well, there is already a small club who decides everything, how to grow the chain. Sorry, you understand that millions of people cannot actually do it, so just delegate to them. So, there are certain technologies that you will never be decentralized if you use this technology. But when technical decentralization is there, okay, you may not be decentralized today, but you have a path to decentralization, and slowly, you will decentralize more and more and more because you can technologically. So if we don't recognize technical decentralization as a key thing, we may run the risk of making errors.
That's great. That's a great perspective. I do appreciate what you just said in the context of there's a lot we've had to learn in order to get the regulations right. And I think there's a certain amount of anxiousness in the community, if you will, around regulation, that it's very much needed to enable some of this innovation, as Steve was saying. And yet, there's been a lot to learn to get to this point, to get the right regulation, right? So I think that's a really good balanced way of thinking about it. Thank you both for that. If we maybe switch and talk a little bit more technically, I know our audience is probably a mixture of some folks that have some pretty good depth from a technical perspective and those more at the business level. But let's just explore, if we can, a little bit of what makes the product of Algorand and the capabilities unique. And I know one thing in particular, there's a history with Bitcoin, certainly in terms of proof of work and sort of a shift towards proof of stake, or pure proof of stake in the context of Algorand. Do you want to just talk, Silvio, briefly about just how the technology works and what makes it different?
Yes. So first of all, what is a blockchain? And you get the answer, it's a database, decentralized, that nothing can be altered maliciously, not the content of the blocks, nor the order of the blocks. Okay, but that is not a fixed database. And by the way, guaranteeing that whatever has already been produced cannot be altered, that is easy because you use 50 years old cryptography to solve that problem. What is really the problem in a blockchain is who has the right to choose the next block to attach to the chain. Because if you give me this right, I would be more powerful than any absolute monarch of the past. Because I decide which transaction are going to be seen universally by everybody and which transaction will never be seen. Wow. So it's very important we get this right. And so Nakamoto, Mr. Nakamoto, Mrs. Nakamoto, the Nakamotos started with one good idea, because every first idea is good. I mean, hat off to first idea. And he says, you know what? I don't have this right. You don't have this right either, Matt. Let's make a computational game, very, very hard to solve, a cryptographic riddle. But the first one who solves this riddle has the right, on behalf of all of us, to append the next block on the chain. Okay, so you may think, one day I solve a riddle, one day you solve a riddle. Turns out that when there is competition for solving the riddle, it gets so computational expensive that if you don't have thousands and thousands of supercomputers, hyper dedicated only to one task, solving the riddle, you don't have a chance to generate any single block, to add any single block to the blockchain. And then you have to buy all this equipment, you have to power with tons of electricity, then you have to buy more electricity to refrigerate the tons of equipment that produce an immense amount of heat. Good luck. When this form of participation is so expensive and is growing to be even more expensive, that less and less people can afford it. So there are blockchains in which they consume as much electricity as a small country, and in the case of Algorand, we consume the electricity of 10 homes. That's a totally different story. So delegated proof of stake is, in my opinion, by definition, a centralized system. At least proof of work eventually become, because of cost, more and more centralized. But delegated proof of stake means we elect 10 people, 11 people, 20 people who look honest, and we hope that they remain honest for the foreseeable future, and give them the chance to decide to add blocks and do whatever they want on behalf of all of us. I mean, is this decentralization? Really? No. I mean, just even if you say when people revolted, like in the French Revolution, against excessive centralization of power, the nobles were not 10 or 100 even, right? You have 100,000 of them, but you have millions and millions of dispossessed citizens. So these methods, they mean well, but they don't give the decentralization that generates the trust that is going to make the blockchain successful. Pure proof of stake means essentially that everybody can participate. Even a laptop can participate. The cost of operating your laptop of electricity demand is that your ordinary laptop. Do you worry about how much electricity are you consuming to keep, Gmail always up? No. And that is the level of cost that allows everybody to participate. And so pure proof of stake essentially works at a high level in two stages. I'm going to oversimplify, Matt. But somehow stage one, you reduce potentially 1 billion people to 1,000. And then this 1,000 will agree on the block. Okay? Well, from 1 billion, for the technically inclined of you is 10 to the 9 to 1,000, there are 6 zeros. Okay? So the 6 orders of magnitude reduction. That is impressive. But can you imagine 1 billion people agreeing on a 1,000 group of people randomly selected? No, agreeing on anything is hard, let alone a group of 1,000 people. So what do we solve the problem here? Is that to say there is no time to agree on 1,000 people chosen at random. Here is what we do. We'll give you a cryptographic slot machine that is cryptographically secure, meaning that you can pull the lever only once, and you cannot change the odds of winning when you pull the lever, and you calibrate, let's say the odds of winning are 1 in 1 million. So 1 billion participate, each one individual, no discussion. I do it in my privacy on my computer, you do it on your computer, pull the lever, and only 1,000 of us, on average, will win. But those who win have a mathematical proof that they won, and they can exhibit on the network to say, I'm part of this committee. That's why I'm in charge of the next block. Thank you very much. So you don't have a discussion to select 1,000 people, but 1,000 people select themselves, which sounds absurd. But the cryptography guarantees that they cannot cheat. So who cares? If they select themselves, they do us a favor, because only 1,000 people come forward, rather than having 1 billion people talk until they die in order to select 1,000 people. These are the type of things, ideas that somehow are behind the pure proof of stake, because lowering the lever, you know how much computation it takes? 1 microsecond. Well, that's not much, right? So unless you make participation easy, it's not enough to allow anybody can participate. It has to be low cost to participate. It has to be easy. And that's what we are doing. That's why we have this capability of technical decentralization. Whether people want to take advantage or not is a different story. But technically, we can empower anybody who wants to participate in the consensus of Algorand. And that's why, by the way, when people trust us, because it's not going to be a group of people making all decisions about growing the chain. Is really the coalition of the willing. You're willing, participate, you have the mean, is low cost. That's why we make it so easy for you.
Silvio, that's great. You've done a great job articulating just now sort of how you keep it truly decentralized, and yet the computational impact is certainly confined, and yet you're still achieving the objectives of the broader decentralized network. ESG, as I said in sort of the tee up to this, it has pretty obvious impact there in terms of when you think about the environmental impact of that. Is that becoming a bigger factor in just in terms of like your stakeholders, your clients, and the ecosystem's reliance on Algorand and why they're choosing to work with you guys?
I hope so. And in fact, it is fortunately an impact. So, artists, they artists are really great people who make better life for all of us. And they are very often, most of them underpaid, and a few are very well recognized correctly for their talent. But but even though they want to be paid, they care if they want to do an NFT on which blockchain, because they don't want to contribute to worsening the environment. They don't want to contribute to generating global warming if it can be avoided. They do care. And so the notion that we have a blockchain that has this scale, this level of participation, and yet somehow we take together all of the network participative and energy of 10 homes is very appealing to them. And I'm proud that they think that way, and I hope that more people think that way, because everybody wants growth, and financial growth in particular. That is, I believe, financial freedom is the first freedom, because if we have freedom to do whatever we want, but we don't have money to do anything, are we really free? So I think, but to do this, it doesn't mean that we have to waste energy. And if we're doing something like this, I think it is important. But it's important, again, I'm glad you raised the question, Matt, because not everybody gets it. There are people to say, well, I'm against the blockchains because they waste a lot of energy. We are informed people.
Yeah.
Too bad. But somebody has to ask the right question. Thanks for asking, okay?
Yeah, that's great. We only have a few minutes left, so I do want to remind our audience, please drop in any questions you've got. We've got just a few here. We will just a moment. But please drop in any additional questions that are out there. Steve, why don't we take one of the questions here? I'm just looking at regarding CBDC, central bank digital currencies. Has Algorand gotten involved in any of those initiatives globally, or how do you guys see yourselves playing in that space in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an interesting area. I think something definitely that we see more of central banks looking at, and I think this is an area where some of the technical sort of attributes that Silvio has walked everyone through are critically important, because if you think about how people are going to, if countries and large institutions are going to rely on a big chunk of their economy running on public blockchains for the next years, 50 years, 100 years, they need to really understand that technology is going to be secure. They need to understand that nobody could potentially take control of that to the detriment of their economy, and so I think this is an area where technical properties are very important. And I think whether some of the national projects that we have done, whether with Italy, which is really more around content creators or healthcare payments or whatnot, I think we see a lot of similar diligence that has to sort of go into those projects as well. And so it'll be interesting to see how this how central bank issued currencies emerge over the next several years. But it's definitely something that we see a lot of people thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. Another question here is, what will be a key factor in widespread adoption of blockchain technology? And I'll just offer my personal view on this, and then I'd love to hear from each of you. I do think we're at a point where there certainly is widespread adoption, and as regulatory views become more clear in the year or two ahead, I think there's going to be an even greater level of adoption upon that. But Silvio, Steve?
Well, first of all, as an educator, right? I've been an educator for 40 years. I can just say that education is going to be key. What we are doing now today with Matt, is going to be important, because people use what do they know, and they should know and be skeptical. Our best customers are the ones who will come to us who says, I don't believe a damn thing. That's a good start, because it's much better to say, I have a wrong opinion, I don't want to hear anything else. So education, I think, is going to be a very key role. But then the other one is really reliability. So all too often we see things stop working, or sorry, we are upgrading, 10 hours of IRs of the blocks are no longer produced. Really? No, can you imagine being in an airplane and the pilot starts giving you the other thing, says, we switch the engine off, we are doing an upgrade. I mean, so reliability and scalability and real education. And also, I really believe a key factor is going to be governance to enable consensual upgrade of the protocol. And that, I think, we got it right in Algorand, and we put it from the very beginning. We are launching governance and I think tomorrow officially. That will be very exciting for the ecosystem. But the technical ability to have a consensual upgrade, we insisted to put in on day one, because nothing in life that is not improvable, upgradable, is going to live very long. Okay, or is a very bad life. So life is about intelligent adaptation to changing circumstances. Our world keeps on changing, and a blockchain that wants to serve its community of today and that of tomorrow must be one that allows for consensual upgrade.
That's great.
Steve, I just wanted to add one thing to this, which I think probably answers some other questions as well, which is, I think the question around adoption and use cases. And I think I think one answer is, we're starting to see, rapid adoption in kind of all the areas that we've discussed today, today there's about 700 or so projects that are building on top of Algorand that, kind of actively using the protocol and building their own layer 2s. Those projects have created about 13.5 million users that are kind of active on the network today, and we're seeing that grow very quickly. And so I think the short answer to all of this is applications that people find valuable and want to use every day are what drives more adoption. And I think the markets are starting to create those applications. And so I know there's been sort of a bit of a narrative, especially, if you go back a couple of years, where, when are people going to start using blockchain? And I guess the networks, and the answer is, they already are today. And we're starting to see that at much larger scale than we have before. And so from our perspective, it's only a matter of time before we'll see from tens of millions of users to hundreds of millions of users. And I think this is the sort of global scale that, certainly Silvio had in mind when he, created the idea of Algorand in the first place. And I think we're really excited to see so many participants with so many different ideas and new technology building on top of the platform and kind of growing the ecosystem.
That's terrific. Well, I want to thank you both. We're about to get the hook here. It's been a very, very enjoyable conversation. I appreciate everything you've been able to share, and I've learned a lot. So thank you. And thank you to Boston FinTech Sandbox. I'm sad to not be there in Boston with the rest of you, but hope to be back next year. So thank you again to both of you, and thank you to the entire community that joined this session here today.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a
pleasure.
Thanks,
everyone. Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Thank you.